Namaskar and welcome to the India Foundation's podcast. In this edition, we feature the India Foundation's dialogue with Mr. Edel Secondat on his recent book, She's China. Here we begin.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to India Foundation Dialogue 79. Uh, Welcome you all to this dialogue. And as you know, IF Dialogues, we have been conducting it virtually for some time. And today, we have a wonderful dialogue on a book that is She's China. The book has been authored by Mr. Edel Secondat. And Edel Secondat, as you would appreciate, is a pseudonym, it's a pen name for an author who graduated from La Sorbonne University from Department of Philosophy under Professor Francois Watton, and then, of course, spent almost the entire last decade in People's Republic of China. And it's a book which talks about his personal experiences, and he's called a spade a spade. And that's one of the reasons why he had to resort to a pseudonym for writing this book. And well, this is going to be a very, very interesting discussion. And without wasting much time, I'll hand over to my fellow director, Shri Kom Carpentier, to conduct the proceedings from here on.
Thank you very much, Alokji. Good evening to all. Good evening, Mr. Secondat. I am glad that we have this opportunity to discuss a few salient points in your book. I'll start with a first question, which has to do with your very interesting analysis of the Chinese merger between capitalism and communism. The eminent Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben has said that the near future is more and more about communistic capitalism. That's the way he calls it. And if you look at some of the plans being proposed by the Davos World Economic Forum, you see that there is a sort of an emphasis on increasing collectivization of property, so that, to put it in one sentence, according to that report, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. Now, would you please tell us what struck you about this Chinese march towards a new form of high-tech socialism, which President Xi Jinping alluded to in his very recent speech to the People's Assembly?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for showing up today. This communistic capitalism that I have seen in the Giorgio Agamben's book, it didn't surprise me. I have somehow the same feeling about what is happening. It's not only something Chinese, because I am not sure that we have the right to say that communism and capitalism are really two opposite systems. The more I think of it, the less difference I can see. We can see nowadays in some of the most capitalist countries, huge organizations taking control of a huge amount of power and being completely free from the market. They don't have to be on the market to go on their commercial activities. I'm thinking a lot about Amazon or Google or any of those huge companies that most of the big countries have managed to grow. And communism, in another way, is also a plan. It's a plan, just like any company is. So they both actually share capitalism at the stage we know nowadays, and communism as we have known it so far is, they share the fear of the market, and they fear a sort of freedom. So they probably will tend to become one single system, and we can also find an example of that in the let's say economics as a service, when you can see that some items or some goods that we would have owned 10 years ago are now seen as a global service that belongs to one of those huge plants. And these elementary services, for example, in China, biking is not something that you could do without being really involved into one of these huge companies that is called Alipay. It's still possible, obviously, to buy your own bike, but most of the time you need to subscribe to a huge organization to do to lead your ordinary life. So yes, I think China is a pioneer. I don't know. It's true that they have been, in my mind, the first one to go on this far, but they probably are still a bit late somehow.
In this regard, you make a very interesting analysis and description of the social credit system in China. It has been decried extensively abroad as a very totalitarian, as a very effective way of controlling people. However, you also point to the fact that it's a corrective to the inherent inequality of capitalism, in the sense that rich people may have benefits and advantages from their wealth, but the poorer people, I mean, people who may work on low salaries, can improve their social status by behaving according to the rules. Obviously, the rules are partly ideological, but many of them are about simply good citizenship, you know, cleaning, not getting drunk, applying, going by the laws, recycling, etc., etc. Do you think, in a way, the social credit system has been unfairly depicted, that there are some possible advantages or some possible merits to it?
Well, yes, I know in most Western countries, in Europe, obviously, this sort of social credit system is almost an insult by itself. People would start to scare when they hear such a thing. And I admit it is scaring indeed. Well, however, when I saw this first this word social credit system the first time, I thought, but what does it really mean? What is it that is different from money? Because I find that money is a social item as well. So what's supposed to be the difference between these two social credits that they are? And then, yes, I think that the Chinese government tries somehow this social credit thing that is not accomplished yet. It's still a fantasy at the moment we are speaking. It's not really. It's not finished. It's still in progress. However, it's already somehow another kind of currency, and you could get rich in this spare currency. So yes, if you get rich in this social credit system, you might somehow catch up with those who are rich in the normal money, but that may be a little bit poor in social credit system money. So there is a sort of balance into society that may come back using this sort of extra money. So yeah, probably this is the way the Chinese government might have this system accepted by the population, because obviously everybody enjoyed a lot of improvement in its everyday life thanks to the last 20, 30 years economic growth that has been a big improvement for almost everybody. But nowadays that the economic revolution has been accomplished, the inequalities tend to stabilize, and the government needs to do something to help those who might be left over by the normalization and the economic routine of the current system. So the social credit might not be something that will never go out of China. I think actually even the most liberal countries might accept this somehow, and they have somehow already. Yes, it's we need to see that, but also I need to say I don't think that this system could exist without a sort of democratic approval from the people. It's difficult to set up such a system without them to individually agree somehow.
Let me take you to the educational sphere. You have given a very vivid picture of Chinese education. And contrary to what most people think, because China is now seen as a country of overachievers in certain fields, particularly science, technology. But what you describe is in fact a mass education system, if you want to call it education, which by and large does not support talent and individual excellence. It is more about getting everybody in and making sure that they behave and don't create trouble. And then from what you say, the only thing that really matters is passing that central exam, that national exam, cramming as much literal, I mean, sort of, you know, as they say, rote knowledge as possible, and just making sure you make it through the exam. How do you explain, however, the increasing excellence of so many Chinese, despite that apparently ineffective education system by and large, especially given when you say that most of them have to go abroad to study and get real knowledge? That in itself seems to be a major weakness in the Chinese system, isn't it so?
Yes, it is. I think, well, knowing the needs of the Chinese economics at the moment, they need obviously a lot of effective brains. They cannot avoid to be, let's say, the client. The Chinese students are the customers of the foreign education system, and well, it's unavoidable. They can't do it on their own, because teaching, let's say, give a free lecture in China is obviously something very difficult. So yes, they need to be abroad to study. They need to absorb what they can absorb abroad, and once they have done it, they go back in China and they bring back some knowledge, and they are productive, effective back in their country. Let's say that it's a sort of normal system that that they will probably have to let go as long as the state or the party wants to control the education system.
Yes, because you point out that a lot of those young people who have seen the world outside and who have tasted different sort of political and cultural and economic organization may not always remain docile to the party's leadership. I mean, obviously Confucianism may help to keep the discipline, but it probably is getting increasingly difficult for these young people to blindly follow the guidelines provided by the ideology.
True. Thankfully, people who have studied abroad and are well trained and hence really helpful to the Chinese economics. These people remain the elite of the country, and they are not frustrated at all by the situation. They probably enjoy a much better personal situation than what they would get if they definitely have moved in a Western country, where they would have become random, well-educated youth. But when they are back in China, they enjoy a sort of special status, because even though many Western countries nowadays have their education system packed with Chinese youth, only a small share of them is actually allowed to leave. So people who have been taught abroad remain really precious and really respected. They are not yet an element of trouble for the central government. However, I think it will be difficult to make these people forget what they have seen abroad, and they are now used to some international comparison. So they are somehow politically aware and somehow less docile and more dangerous to authoritarian government. Yes, I think.
In fact, this is one of the great mysteries of China. If you compare it to the Soviet Union kept at least a facade of socialist austerity. And the Soviets were not generally buying luxury properties outside and living the high life openly. But nowadays, you have so many Chinese billionaires who are buying French chateaus and vineyards and enjoying the best the world has to offer. And yet, they are supposed to be under the control of this rather stern communist party, which enjoins upon them a set of behaviors. How do you explain that ability of the party and of the government to keep all those billionaires in check, even though they must live light years away of what the communist ideal is?
There is I think most of the billionaires are always fighting to escape the Chinese system, but there are two possibilities, two main concern. First of all, I think most of the billionaires or rich people, as soon as they can, try to find a spare passport for their use, for their kids. Australia, Canada, obviously the two most important places where they could get a safe nationality for their child. But for themselves, they can't really leave China, because if you actually get an extra passport, you are supposed to lose your Chinese nationality. And if you lose your Chinese nationality, you basically lose all of your wealth. So I think there is a sort of deal. The deal is that the millionaire himself sacrificed somehow his life by obeying the party, and the kids are supposed to enjoy freedom and to start again in a democratic place where they will remain safe. I think this is the deal somehow. The Chinese government is really able to control nationalities and people wealth that are based in China. It's really difficult to escape the control of the party. So they tend to be happy with this agreement that they have somehow.
We have talked about the importance of modern knowledge, modern civilization in China for technological and scientific progress. But let's talk a little bit about the traditional culture of China. I mean, most of the films I see now are about the glory of the Chinese Empire in the past. You know, they have done a lot of work to illustrate and highlight the power and the magnificence of the imperial courts in the last few thousand years. So that obviously is intended to revive the pride of the Chinese in their past. But you, who are a scholar of Chinese ancient poetry, you have translated it, and therefore you can enjoy the very esoteric beauty of, let's say, Tang poetry, for example. Mm-hmm. Do you feel the Chinese today, most of them, or even a minority of them, are able to partake in that, to really understand it, given that the language, from what you say, has changed so much? It has essentially taken a lot of features of the Western languages, and therefore it is quite a different structure than what the Chinese civilization was built on in the past.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. It's not at all specific to China. The language has evolved a lot in most languages the last, let's say, 2,000 years. And since the Chinese literature is really, really ancient, it's true that some very old ones are barely understandable by common people nowadays. Well, however, I think it's still understandable if you study the ancient Chinese properly. But it's true that the common people might find this difficult to read. However, the official policy, the educational policy says that everybody has to learn this poetry and a very important amount of texts, of old texts, should be learned by the kids when they are, I think, at primary school. They are supposed to give a reading of these poetries. Well, even though they don't really understand what they are supposed to read, they tend to have a very sentimental and they are really attached to their old writings, even though they don't really understand them anymore. So we will see. We'll see. It's true that part of them are only here to be used as a sort of exercise. For example, if you do calligraphy, you could use these old poetries to exercise your calligraphy, but still it's difficult to actually make sure of what you are writing.
In fact, I think that from what you say, the electronic medium has facilitated the revival of ancient Chinese calligraphy, because they no longer have to deal with the pinyin compositions, and they therefore can basically go back to the very artistic approach to writing. Isn't it so?
The technology, well, let's say that the modern Chinese writing is based on the standard keyboard. So obviously, the calligraphy itself has somehow disappeared. But it's true, you could use your smartphone to draw your character on your smartphone, and somehow it looks like calligraphy. But no, I don't think that ancient calligraphy will really survive electronics, because electronics is set in a sort of American way of writing, and so now Chinese needs to go through this keyboard, need to go through all these QWERTY letters to be written. So this has changed the way people write, and probably the way people will express themselves in the future also. The keyboard is changing the language, I think.
Let's say a few words about minorities, in particular Xinjiang. You spent some time there, Xinjiang Uyghur, and as you know now, the general discourse outside China is that China is carrying out some kind of genocide on that minority population. Your perspective from watching it on the spot is a little more nuanced. How would you describe, in a few words, the Chinese policy towards the Uyghurs and other minorities?
I would describe it as very preoccupying. That's true. The word genocide doesn't seem relevant to me at the moment, because the population of this minority is still increasing. There are more Uyghurs at the moment than 20 years ago. So it's difficult to say it's a genocide as long as the population, the demography is expanding, increasing. However, it's true that they tend to control these minorities' births, what I see, by some of awful contraceptive sort of experiences. You can find obviously all the documents online. It's really scary how they do. The country itself, the place itself, it's a huge concentration camp. You have seen the photos of the actual concentration camp, but when you are walking in the street, it's actually like if you are walking inside a jail. People are free of absolutely nothing. Controls are everywhere. It's a sort of actual war. I think the forces are controlling people in real time everywhere, the more they can. So the authority, the forces pressurize the people at an unbelievable level. It's barely possible to imagine how the country can go on like this. And they go on like this because the Eastern China works for them. Eastern China is financing the control on the Xinjiang. They are financing the forces. Maybe let's say half of the people there is paid to be part of the security system.
But at the same time, sorry, at the same time, you say that the Chinese government's policy is to try to recruit the youth, the Uyghur youth, as well as the Tibetan youth, by giving them certain, positive discrimination in terms of studies and in terms of facilities, so that they basically go to Eastern China, to what you may say the main land, and become more like the Hans. I think that's pretty much what they are trying to do, right?
Yes, they pressurize a lot local people, and they give them, on the other hand, they give them the opportunities to leave the place and to melt with the Eastern Chinese people. So, for example, the national exams are easier for them, so they could get to university in the Eastern China, and obviously by going on in their studies and by working with the Han people, they start to enjoy and to think twice about what they actually want for themselves, and they get used to a better life. That's how they will probably manage to control the country, by picking all the promising youth and giving it an exit way, and giving them an opportunity to leave the sort of hell they have built in Xinjiang. It's a double. It's a system. It's sort of two times engine, the sort of very effective engine that can bring both hope and control at the same time.
There is now a debate, particularly in the US, about the real power and the real potential of China on the world stage. One of the major books fueling the controversy has been a book by Michael Beckley, who essentially says that there is no way China will ever beat the US or catch up with it. And he gives a number of reasons for that. And he has been supported in an article in The Atlantic by David Frum, who was a speechwriter for President George Bush Jr., among others. On the other hand, you have people like John McEwen, who has come up against that rather negative assessment of China, and has said that, on the contrary, there is no doubt that the US is weakening very fast in many ways, and that in contrast, China is building strength and is very much united politically around the ideal of becoming the world #1 power. After spending all this time in China and seeing it through the lockdown, because you were there during the very difficult year 2020, during the pandemic, what is your assessment of China's real strength and weaknesses?
Well, I don't know if ever China could be militarily more important than the USA. I don't know. What I think is that, knowing China, it's impossible for them to go on without at least another important country that could give them some fuel. And I think the USA or most of liberal countries can't go on without these other counterpart that China has been, and that is a country from which they can also get economic growth. So China takes from the outside knowledge, technologies, examples to follow, inspiration, everything. And in the other hand, the outside countries get economic growth, get cheap products for their people from China. So I barely imagine China alone. I don't think we could have a Chinese planet. The world can't really go on its own like this. China needs the outside, and the outside somehow need countries at least a little bit like China. So I don't really think they are supposed to actually fight. Obviously, they need to try themselves, but to me, China is the best customers of the Western society, and the Western society is the best customer of China. So we probably are in a somehow stable situation.
Very interesting, because that is, of course, what some are denying, claiming that there will be an inevitable military confrontation, even if it is a new age military confrontation, in the sense that it's not a conventional clash between armies, but more like a constant war with all sorts of hidden weapons, electronic, cybernetic, etc., etc. I think we have come to the end, so I will request Mr. Alok Bansal, Director of India Foundation, to give the closing comments.
Oh, thank you very much. I think it was a nice discussion. I'll now request General Dhruv Katoch to propose a vote of thanks to the speaker.
Thank you, Alok. I think this has been a most interesting 1-hour discussion. Now, the first time when I actually came into contact with Edel Secondat's book, She is China, was I think about 5 or 6 months ago, when Mr. Combe Carpentier gave me a soft copy. And I went through that soft copy for the first time. I found this book absolutely fascinating, because for the first time, I actually saw a book on China written by a person who has spent about a decade of his life there, talking about things which were different. Otherwise, as a military person, we were looking into hard power, we were looking into the military, the naval aspects, we were looking into their economy. But no book really has looked into what the common Chinese think, what he feels, the sociological aspects of what happens. And I think it is very important for understanding a particular country to know what their people are thinking on a day-to-day basis, the common man, the common woman. And I think this book, it's a very slim book. It makes for very easy reading. And I personally found it very fascinating. So Edel, my compliments to you for putting out something which I personally feel is absolutely unique.
Thank you.
The things like social credit, it is something which most Indians won't even think of, that, okay, you have a system like social credit there, or an education system which is totally different to the way we in India or the others operate. The control system, when anything happens in India and the whole opposition is out after the government to say that these chaps are fascists, I think they should see what happens in China. They will actually understand what fascism is and what control really means, where you are in a position to control or to get information about every facet of a person's life. I think it was also very interesting when Edel spoke about that, the linkages, between the economies of China and the West, and the way they are interlinked. So obviously there are mutual dependencies, and I don't see those dependencies going. So if anybody thinks that the West is going to come up and, gang up against China, I really don't see that happening, as Edel has very rightly stated. one of the things which again comes out in that book and during the discussion is that the Chinese have actually laid a great deal of emphasis on the history and culture of the Chinese people. And one thing which I know of China, I mean, of course, I haven't traveled as extensively. I've just had one small visit, but it is a very proud people. And one of the aspects which comes out is the way China is developing, that sense of pride remains, which is also a factor which gives President Xi Jinping his popularity. The achievements of the country, I think they're very, very proud of it. And that is going to keep Xi Jinping firmly in power. The latest, of course, being their mission to Mars. I think it has been very, very useful for me personally to go through the book. So thank you very much for taking the time off to be with us this evening, to share your thoughts of the book and to take on a variety of questions.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the India Foundation's podcast. To hear more from us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the India Foundation's channel.